Hey, what's up? Hilltop Knowledge here. In this video, we're going to be getting into why incest is perceived as evil. Alright, so let's just jump right into it. First of all, let's answer the question of what is incest. So, to fully get this answer is kind of difficult because if you go to different cultures, they assume different things. Some cultures, based on the traditions, their own traditions, say incest is only when it's certain family members, like your close relatives, like sister, brother, father, mother, daughter. But however, others in that tradition, not others, but everyone else in that tradition says you can't marry an aunt, but an uncle can marry a niece, right? So if you ask the regular culture, they'll tell you, hey, that's incest. But that specific culture says, it's not, because of that threshold where that differentiates what is incest, what is not incest. So, firstly, what exactly incest is relative, and no one actually knows. Like another question is it incest for a male to marry his stepsister? Let's say they got married ahead of time, and then their parents got married. All of a sudden, their sister and brother, or stepsister and brother. Does that make it incest? So there's a lot of these lines that don't make sense. So what it comes down to, and I find it interesting, what it comes down to is that people originally felt that incest was evil, and so that permeated throughout the history. And so culture started adopting that incest was evil as a result. Okay? But really, there's no objectivity of what incest actually is, so you can't even say that it's evil if you don't even know what it is. So in the Jewish tradition, the Bible, and the Christian tradition, obviously, they had the tradition that it's close, and they had specific family members that were not considered off limits, and so a specific line was created. But because of the concept of incest, all across many different cultures, finding it taboo or wrong, or something that's unethical, or something you shouldn't do initially, or something that's weird, various attitudes throughout history. But going far back, it developed various cultures for why it's wrong. Now, there's a social reason why incest became wrong. There's a biological reason. And there's probably also a biological reason connected to a sociological reason. So we know that if close family members have offspring, what tends to happen is that the offspring end up not becoming as strong or as fertile as well off. There's usually genetic complications. I looked up some family that was involved in incest, and they had blue skin because their blood didn't produce enough red things that make the cells red, which was probably helping with immunity or something, and so the skin turned blue. And so but the point here is that there were faults with the family members. So what you find here is that there's a biological setback, a genetic setback with this phenomenon, at least at this point in the species, because originally with the animals, many of them commit incest because there wasn't a genetic mutation that frequented as often, right? It may still be more probable, but the statistical chances are much lower for animals that are not as evolved than humans. So humans will not commit incest because it's very connected to a sociological barrier, which is overlap with biological phenomenon. So the animals would commit incest because they don't have, first of all, they don't have a sense of social interaction as much. There are all kinds of social interactions, but incest, they're not evolved enough to factor in incest as a complication for their sociological evolution. You know, the way sociology in the brain evolves is quite interesting, and animals do experience similar phenomenon to humans once the predators are away. Once the predators are away, animals can start relaxing, and then they start to have similarities to the human phenomenon where we get depressed. So animals get depressed if they have all their needs satisfied and there's no hunt. Part of the animal instinct is that you need a hunt, you need some kind of movement, that you have a purpose, that you have a drive to do something, which is interesting because your drive is animalistic and humans need that, and no one tells you that. No one tells you it's good to have some kind of animalistic desire, which is like to keep moving up in the food chain or in the sociological food chain, but that's just the truth. So you see here, there's a lot of similarities, but the similarities don't extend enough where the incest factor became such a problem throughout most species. Now, that's something I want to do more research on, because I can discover if the various species actually experience genetic setbacks and how much they would, and also if they have sociological setbacks, like with the apes. Like, do they avoid their own family? That's something to look into, it's easy Googling you can do, but it's definitely worth exploring to get a sense of why things are happening the way they do. So we understand what incest is, more or less. It's relative. We understand that that incest is a sociological idea and not necessarily a crime. And the only way it's become kind of perceived as a crime is because the culture says, because there's genetic setbacks that can take place, right? Let's not even look for ways to prevent the genetic setbacks by healing that situation. So offspring can be 100% healthy. They just say it's off limits to even talk about. It's similar to pedophilia, you see here. And that's why incest remains tabooed or considered evil. And obviously a main factor is because it's in something called the Bible. And we already have set stones interpretations of what the Bible meant, and the purpose of the Bible, and the purpose of those interpretations, and the fact that many religious people are overlapping the morality of the Bible with objective morality, and not subjective, and not changeable morality, and not something that evolves and stuff like that. And because of that, that leads into this idea that incest is evil. You know, I think that could change. I think it will change. If you're watching this and you think that I'm a bad person for saying such a thing, question yourself: do you think homosexuality is evil? And if you do, okay, then all the more so you're going to think about this video. But if you don't, then try to see how things can evolve. How 100 years ago, most gay people were being lynched for having open sexual intercourse. Okay, so another thing to talk about is that I really hope no one calls me to interrupt this video. Is that incest is considered by people to be a familial problem. So, meaning the assumptions that psychologists make is that if you decide to see a family member in a intimate light, then there's something wrong with the brain. So you see here that the assumption that psychologists are making, if you speak to them, no matter how open-minded they are, is that something went off in the brain that caused you. But if you know anything about psychology, not anything, but if you know the foundations of why we think the way we think, it's very sociologically structured. So if you did not believe that such a thing was wrong, the likelihood that intimate relations with closer family members would take place, because it's the believed morality that decreases the chances, since there's a taboo, right? So no one wants to, even if they did, they'll push it away and also deny those desires. So there is a human nature to be attracted to skin, to certain parts of the body, and it gets coupled with what's the word, the culture's standards of nudity and attractiveness. So in many instances, you showed a naked woman a body to a male, and then all of a sudden you see their sister's face on that body afterwards. They would either vomit, or they'll accuse it of being a trick, or they'll try as hard as they can not to get turned on, because they believe it's wrong, and they also believe that somehow the connection between a hot body and the face of a closer family member is impossible. And so there's you see the amount of discord going on in a person's body and mind for such a situation is immense. It's immense. And it makes you wonder why the culture is so hesitant to see this as the truth, that it is possible and nothing wrong with it. So okay, so that covers some major issues, but now let's get into the spiritual territory. The reason why the biological being evolves the way it does is because the ego, or the other side to life, the opposite of proper functioning, is hesitant to allow certain things. So you can consider God the Father, right? So God created children, and we are his children, right? So this is a metaphor for human nature's way of human depiction's way of understanding how things are operating. And so the ego would be God's nemesis, so to speak. And God is giving forth himself, right? And then he wants to love himself. So the ego says, I don't want you to love yourself, because then I can exist. So really, the hate towards incest and the end result that incest would lead to anomalies has to do with the ego's desire not to die. Now, this can't really be proven as easily, but I'm sure if you explore it, you'll be able to discover ways that you can prove this in some light. And so what you have here is a truth that incest is actually an integral part of love. Because if you had complete love without any barriers, you would feel open to incest. And I'm not referring to the culture's hate that's pre-existing. I'm talking about even if there wasn't a culture's hate, there would still be an ego that's trying to maneuver cultures and create energy of animosity towards the phenomenon. So I'm also not saying that it's a good thing, because there's already genetic setbacks. But I'm saying that it shouldn't be considered a bad thing. And I have to be concerned that this video will label me as a crazy person. That is the problem, because incest is considered evil and monstrous to societies at large, to cultures at large, especially nowadays, a lot of them. When there is nothing objectively wrong with it, except maybe some setbacks biologically, maybe. And that's worth looking into. I looked into it. The percentage does increase the closer family members that you marry. So it's always better to marry, far out, outside the close range. But I am pointing out that there is nothing wrong with it. Because many people are saying that incest is so evil that it's equivalent to murder, or it's similar to the most horrific crimes, war crimes, or anything you could think of. And is that true? Now, incest was done to uphold power, right? In ancient Egypt and elsewhere. I think maybe it was Rome, maybe it was Greece. Not quite sure, but it was done as that way to kind of keep the power in a specific range. So you could argue there's negative connotations. They're trying to keep power in its own vicinity. And that's its purpose, and that's the drive of that desire. It's to keep things solidified with power, and we know that's wrong. The people should have power, and so I don't think this is a proof. If anything, I'm just gonna tell you that those societies where that's what they were doing, they were believing that's fine, and so yes, the kings did that, but I'm sure so did the lower classmen also do that, because that's what the kings were doing. That's what the leaders were doing. But you see here that morality is subjective. So don't point to the leaders and say, oh, those were bad leaders trying to solidify power. Even though it was strategic, it was wrong. And therefore, it's wrong for the people to do it. No, it wasn't necessarily wrong for that reason. It certainly wasn't a good way of using that situation, but it doesn't prove that it's wrong. If anything, you can take a spiritualized spin and say it proves that the ego was allowing incest only because power dynamics were involved. And if not, it wouldn't allow it because there's too much love in that facet. Yeah. The general understanding is that incest is a form of overstepping your boundaries. Meaning, it's only someone is someone who's crazy. And what's interesting is that God has no boundaries. He's everyone and everything. And so, if someone has that desire, you can even compare them more to God. But people are not doing that because they're too stuck in the old interpretations, and so they'll refuse to do that. But you could spin it. I'm not saying you should, but I'm saying you can. Which is interesting. But you see, everything I'm saying, you should be getting the concept or the idea that it's all societally built. All of our ideas or conceptions or ways of seeing things and viewing things is completely self-created by you and your partners, comrades, your communities, who give you a sense of what's right and wrong, and what you should believe and what you shouldn't believe is wrong. So that's all I'm saying here. I think it's very important to consider the concepts in this video. Have a good day.